The Echo Chamber, brought to you by the Holmes Report and produced by the international broadcast specialist Marketeers.
Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the Echo Chamber. This is Arun, Sudhaman. Joining me on the line from London, Weber Shandwick, Chairman for EMEA and Asia Pacific, Tim Sutton. Tim, how are you?
I'm good, thank you, Arun. Lovely to talk to you. How are you?
I'm very well. And I think it's going to be a different one today because for reasons best known to yourself, Tim, you have taken it upon yourself to interview me.
Yes.
Okay.
Well, thank you, Arun, first of all, for giving me that favour. It's something I've been wanting to do, simply because sitting in the Holmes Report, you follow, every issue, everyone. And I just thought it'd be interested to kind of get your idea of what might be going on. I don't know if you know, in the Middle Ages, back in Merry England, they had something called the Lord of Misrule. Have you heard of the Lord, if I can say it right, the Lord of Misrule? Let me explain. The Lord of Misrule was at Christmas, which is what we're close to. In wealthy households, the normal hierarchical structure of lords down to peasants was reversed for a day. And a peasant was put in charge of all the revelries. And the lord had to kind of, within reason, do what the peasant said and so on. And so I'm the peasant today, Arun, and you're the lord. It is the Lord of Misrule. In Scotland, it was known as the Abbot of Unreason. So I'm hoping that we'll be reasonable, fairly. But it's the Misrule celebrations, and that's why we're reversing today. So this is an ancient English tradition. All
right. I'm not sure the analogy totally works, but okay. I'll bear with
there you go. You'll bear with it. Well, so my first question, Arun, is, and just as you say to me and your other guests, sometimes I don't want you to say anything confidential that you don't want to say. But we've talked a lot. You and I have talked a lot. I've heard you talk to other people a lot about how the business model might be changing in PR agencies for all sorts of reasons we might get into later. And by the way, I think it is. But my question to you is, for your listeners and those who avidly follow the Holmes Report, which I include myself amongst, can you describe your own business model in general terms? And I'm kind of interested to know if that's been changing a lot in the last 2 to 3 years, or whether you foresee any changes.
Sure, yeah. I mean, our business model is I think not dissimilar to many media companies. We produce, first and foremost, we produce a lot of content, and then we look for different ways to use an awful word, monetize that content. And that comes in the form of, for example, award shows. So the Sabre Awards, which is, a reasonably big driver of our revenue around the world. We have our various events, our conferences, which also are a big commercial driver for us. And then the other areas where we bring in revenue are sponsored content, so content submitted by advertising partners. And we also have a premium content section, which is available to subscribers. And I don't think any of that is particularly revolutionary from a kind of media business model perspective. I don't think it's going to change dramatically in the future. I've always thought for us, it's not so much about how we make our money, but it's more about where we make our money. So the balance might shift. The sponsored content, for example, has grown a lot for us. And of course, the geographic spread might shift as we've expanded our global footprint. But I don't see any really dramatic changes. It's not maybe a little bit boring, but there aren't that many ways to make money out of the media these days. I mean, we potentially could look at ways to monetize our data better, because we do have a wealth of data on people, but it's a little bit tricky these days with GDPR and so forth.
GDPR.
Yeah, so it's not a huge driver. I mean, we do a certain amount of consulting as well, for agencies and for corporations, but that's so resource intensive, or so it's really time heavy, and it's kind of built around our expertise that it's a hard thing to grow, as you know, running a PR firm. So I don't actually see any huge changes in that model. For us, the drivers, I think, have always been just building deeper relationships in the markets in which we operate, and then expanding those markets. The other thing we have often talked about doing, but have had less success doing, is perhaps expanding into adjacent industries. So, but looking at, for example, digital and advertising. I mean, we've seen some growth there in terms of our awards show and our conferences. But again, that's something that does require, I think, pretty significant investment if you want to do it properly.
I'm kind of interested in what seems to me to be an inbuilt tension in that model, and I don't think this is unique to you, but it would apply to many other media organisations. And perhaps you might disagree, but let me describe the tension as this: that on the one hand, you are an independent source of editorial news and comment. And I think most people, I certainly think you do that exceptionally well, and very fairly, if I may say so, as well. Certainly based on my experience of all my dealings with you and your colleagues. So you are kind of independent, and you have comments, of course, commentary, but you report fairly. And I know that for you personally, as a journalist, kind of editorial honesty and integrity are important to you. And yet, at the same time, as you've just said, you do have an awful lot of what you might call sponsored content. Mm-hmm. You do through the savers, which of course people pay to enter, and I assume is a large part of your model, turn up for great dinners in nice places around the world and so on. So, and you even, as you just said, do consulting for some agencies. How do you kind of manage to reconcile those two different things?
It's the perennial challenge for media, I think. It's become more acute over the last decade, I'd suggest, as media organizations have shrunk, and you've seen the rise of perhaps smaller media companies where you do have people like me. I'm editor-in-chief and CEO, so I oversee both editorial and commercial. Now, typically in the media world, that role, you've had a publisher and an editor in most media companies. The publisher has come from the commercial side, but in most companies, the editor would report to the publisher, so the commercial person would reign supreme. I'm not sure that's necessarily a better state of affairs. I mean, in terms of managing that, for us, it's not been that hard, because I think we're all journalists at the top of the company. And so for us, the editorial integrity of the Holmes report has always come first. I think we're all keenly aware that once you lose that, it's pretty much gone forever. And whatever you do commercially at that point is going to be a lot less successful. And so I think we're all very aware that any commercial success this company has is completely dependent on the integrity of its editorial. So it's kind of comes back to that church and state argument, knowing where that line is and enforcing it, really. I mean, I struggle really to think or to find any examples of where people could find, us going easy on someone because they're a sponsor. I mean, I think sometimes the converse may in fact be true.
Yes, indeed.
So I don't know. It's
but for you personally, but in a sense, compared to, as you yourself said, the tension resides within you and with and Paul, because in a media organization, as you say, normally there's the editorial stuff.
Yeah.
And then separately, there's the publisher and the commercial side of the operation, different people. And there's a tension between them, as always. I know. I spoke to editors, newspapers, and so on. But in your case, you're the same people, right? There is no division. So the whatever tension there is happens in your own minds, right?
In theory, yes, but that attention, it so rarely arises. I mean, first of all, we always put editorial first. The viewpoint is always that you can make back the money elsewhere, but you can never really make back the credibility. So that's the first thing. And I don't know, I think because we are journalists, I just think we would, and it's only really happened, I think, 2 or 3 times where someone's tried to exert commercial pressure on us to drop a story. And that probably includes my whole career, not just the Holmes report. And in every situation, I just think the sheer satisfaction you get out of breaking the story regardless, it's just too good to turn down.
Well, you are a bit of a Rottweiler, aren't you? I mean, in a nice you're a cultured Rottweiler.
I wouldn't say that, but I think you do have to make it clear that when that kind of pressure is being exerted, there's only going to be one outcome, and that is that that editorial reigns supreme. Because I do believe.
Well, one thing sorry, Arun, you carry on.
Just to finish that point, but I do believe if you take a long-term view of the business, you can always make the money back elsewhere. But if you allow your credibility to be dented, then I think it's very, very hard to retrieve that kind of situation.
One thing I've always said about you, Arun, is sparing your blushes, but I think it's an important thing to say, is that to me, you are what I would call an old-style journalist. And what do I mean by that? I mean that you follow the old-fashioned virtues of you get a potential story, whether it's pleasing for the people you talk about or it's not pleasing for them. The latter often being saying, "Have you lost his account?" or "Are you about to lose his account?" That kind of story. And what I like is that you check the story with different people, so you never just publish, at least to my knowledge, you don't just publish a story because one person said something, and you always give the other side the opportunity to come back with a view, and you check the story with 2 or 3 or maybe more people in order for you to be as reasonably satisfied as you can be. You never know for absolutely sure, but as reasonably satisfied as you can be that the story you've got is in essence correct and fairly represented. And that kind of used to be, I think, the way journalists were trained, right? Mm-hmm. And to do that, that was kind of a key part of the skill and a key at the core of the concept of journalistic integrity. And it allowed the reader or the viewer to have some degree of confidence, notwithstanding the editorial line of the newspaper or publication, that the news reporting was fair and accurate as it could be. Mm. Now, as you know, and I think you've always done that, and I admire that. And having said that, and I don't want to mention any names, and when you look around now, we're in this brave new world of content, and agencies like mine have kind of thrived, as you know, in the last few years, not just this year, but thrived on the idea of creating what we call engaging content. Mm-hmm. And we would like to think that the content that we produce is similarly grounded in some idea of truth and accuracy as well. We'd like to think that. Mm-hmm. That's at least the standard we aspire to. And that's been great. And as an agency, and all other agencies have made a lot of money on that. Mm. As a citizen now, if I put my citizen hat on, I sometimes worry that, if say we put a piece of content out, so say it's a simple, good old-fashioned news release, let's say, forget the more fancy types of content that we do, and video and web and applications. But let's just say it's a good old-fashioned news release, because they're still there, just about. Mm-hmm. And you see it being printed verbatim, right, by a whole load of different online publications. The press release that's put out is reproduced faithfully. No one's attempted to interrogate it. No one's attempted to get another view from someone else. And it just appears. Yeah. And it's at one level, that's great. I've got a controlled message out there. As a citizen, I kind of worry about that. Do you worry about that?
Yeah, I mean, I see it up close as you do as well. I think we're all aware it happens. I think the curse of journalism, to use the word that I think was popularized by Nick Davies, is real. And
in Flat Earth, is that Flat Earth?
The author of
yes,
Flat Earth News. And we're not immune to this. I wouldn't suggest that we are immune to this. I think there have probably been situations where, in the rush to get a story out, we have perhaps used rather more of a press release than I would like. It's some of it is down to economics. There's no question. Shrinking newsrooms, this obsession with clicks, the rise of digital media, and the idea that page views and clicks somehow equals dollars, means that people are in a hurry now to get out as much content as possible. And so the whole process of producing journalism has kind of broken down. And, really many titles, many digital media, I do see will reprint a press release without questioning what's in it. And it is a big worry. And, you said it was described as, old style journalism, which I think means I'm old, which is fine. I'm quite happy with that. But I do think it's actually just a reflection of the fact that newsrooms, certainly the newsrooms I grew up working in, where I was trained as a journalist, and where Paul Holmes was trained as a journalist, were much better resourced, and you could put people on beats and on stories, and you had sub-editors and copy editors and fact checkers, and so you could make sure that whatever you were printing, because it was print back then, met your journalistic standards of proof. It's just a lot more difficult these days, because I think the twin pressures of a lack of resources and this kind of hunger, unlimited digital inventory, and hunger to drive as much content out as possible. So what we've tried to do at the Holmes Report, and like I said, we're not immune to this because we all feel the pressure, but we've always tried to just take a less is more approach. We don't have to print every story. We don't have to cover every story. We have a very big news in brief section where we often just condense some of these press releases down. And when we do write a story, we try to actually properly write the story and talk to different people and make sure that we are delivering more for our readers than just the press release. Because otherwise, I just don't see why anyone would bother reading what we have to say. And of course, the other thing I should note is, the best stories don't have press releases. And that's always the kind of news I would prefer to go after, always the kind of news I'd prefer to break. Sometimes at odds with people in the industry, but that also takes time, and that is really the hardest thing when you're in a small team like we are, and like many newsrooms are. I think it's just being able to invest a level of time to deliver journalism of a reasonable quality. But yeah, it does worry me. I think it worries lots of people that you can see a release just traveling across the world and being reprinted in so many outlets. And the power now seems to be less focused on what the story is than on how well it's distributed. And I think that is a big concern.
So just another reason to be a grumpy old man then.
Yeah, or woman, but yeah.
Or woman, absolutely. I just before we move away from the Holmes Report onto kind of broader industry questions, but just a couple more questions on this front, Arun, if you don't mind. One of them is talk about awards and the Sabres and Agency of the Year, this region, that region, globally, markets and so on. And you have a great, you've established a great kind of franchise, if I can put it that way. And I also think you deserve, Paul, and you deserve credit for, taking awards into markets which didn't have any, where it's really raised the bar. And, if you win an award, I don't know, in Africa or Eastern Europe or whatever. It's, it's a big thing, and it rightly gets people excited because of, it gets people talking about the quality of work and so on. So I think there've been hugely beneficial aspects of the awards that you run. Some people, I don't say many, some people are sometimes a little cynical about them. On the basis they can say a number of things. They can say, especially when it comes to like agency of the years. And listen, we've been a huge beneficiary, thank you, in the past of being an agency of the year here, there, and everywhere. As you know, and thank you very much, and we're proud of that. But some people say, well, they might say, well, when it comes to Age of the Year, the Holmes Report has to kind of share them round, so we'll give Webber Shandwick this one this year. And, we've got to keep Edelman happy, we'll give them one over there. And, yeah, we haven't rewarded, Burson, Conan, Wolf, so we'll give them one there. Some people say that, right? And I'm interested in what you say about that. Others, come back to this idea of the, well, I mean, you've sort of partly dealt with this, but you might want to address it in terms of the awards. Well, it depends on who gives the sponsorship money. So, as we know, a lot of events you have are sponsored by Webber or sponsored by Edelman or sponsored by Webber. And I know that revenue presumably is important to your business model. And so there is, and you could say, well, it's sour grapes because you didn't win, right? Okay, and no one doesn't win normally complains about the fact they haven't won. But there is that kind of, I wouldn't say it's deep. You sometimes hear that from otherwise intelligent people. What's your response to those kind of comments?
Well, first of all, I think they're really valid concerns, and even if they do come from people who haven't won, and then, very easy for us to sit here and go, oh, that's just sour grapes. I think they are really valid concerns. And so I think they have to be addressed, no matter what kind of business you're in or what kind of awards you're giving out. How to put this? I mean, it's really difficult for us to make decisions based on sponsorship revenue, because I think for as long as I've been, especially if we talk about agencies of the year specifically, for as long as I've been doing it, and that includes my time with the Holmes Report and before that with Haymarket and Campaign, and I think their Agency of the Year awards as well are similarly above reproach. The goal has always been to make a decision that you can defend editorially, and if you can't do that, then you don't make that decision. And when we make those decisions, we are in, you're surrounded by other journalists, and I think the idea of allowing commercial considerations to cloud that would be really difficult. First of all, I mean, then there's more, I suppose, more kind of prosaic factors, right? So if you're talking about the big categories, say large agency, you mentioned Network of the Year, Global Network of the Year, Webber Shandwick, Edelman, Burson, Conan, Wolf. I think the last three winners. I mean, every agency in that category is a sponsor, and is a sponsor of some value to the Holmes Report. So it would be hard to pick one over another based on their sponsorship. I think people who make these criticisms, honestly, I don't think they actually look at the decisions we're making in terms of Agency of the Year in any great detail, because there are so many Agencies of the Year that we've handed out that have zero commercial relationship with us in so many markets around the world. And again, that's not by design. We just go through the submissions, we go through our all the meetings we have with agencies around the world, and we make the decisions. It's I actually think it would be really hard to allow commercial considerations just because of the process we follow. And even if you look at, for example, you mentioned Global Network of the Year, Webber, Edelman, Burson, Conan, Wolf. I mean, it's so Webber's won it what, 3 years in a row, I think, at one point, and then it was Edelman, and then Burson, Conan, Wolf. I mean, if you're Fleischman, Hillard, or Ketchum or Hill and Knowlton Strategies, I mean, by now you'd be pumping money in if you thought it was going to get you an award.
Yeah, good point.
And I mean, I don't know how we can. I think this could have.
So the strategy's failed,
Well,
has it? No,
yeah,
I'm
I just the results. I just think the results speak for themselves. Really, I don't know. Yeah, I just don't know how we could make it any clearer. It's
yeah. No, I think you've answered. I think you've answered very well
But having said that, I'm sure this criticism will persist. I think it's honestly it's just a cost of doing business. But I think by and large, people who know us well kind of appreciate that the Agency of the Year awards are. We may not get it right. I'm not claiming that at all, but I certainly, when we get it wrong, it's definitely not for commercial reasons.
Okay, good point. So, final question on Holmes Report journalism and so on before we just have a little bit of time on the broader issues. Sure. So you're a journalist. Tell me a sort of personal question, if you don't mind. What are you kind of most proud of as a journalist? And second question is, what have you been most embarrassed by ever? Or maybe you've never been embarrassed. I can assure you I have. But so I just wondered, what are you most proud of, and any embarrassment story?
I think I'm honestly most proud of just the team we've built here at the Holmes Report and the progress we've made over the last 8 years. I think, Tim, you know as well as anyone the situation when I came into the Holmes Report. A much smaller team, really only 2, maybe 3 people in the business, and the progress we've made since then without any external funding to go to, we're 10 people now. We have journalists in New York and London and San Francisco and Hong Kong, and to build our global footprint and to have had a lot of fun doing it, and actually to kind of build this culture here. It makes me really proud, but I think it's a huge team effort, and that I think has been amazing, really, because I honestly didn't think we would get this far when I joined the company, if I'm being honest. And yet somehow we have, and it's as far as I'm concerned, it's still early days. I still think there's a lot more we can do, and there's a lot more we will do. But that makes me proud. I mean, there's stories that we've broken and that I've broken along the way, but I think that's just part of the job, really. I rarely look back on those things and say, "Oh, I'm so happy." I'm always worried about losing the next one. So yeah, that's what makes me. That's what makes me most proud. But obviously, as you know, never get too proud. What am I most embarrassed by? I mean, I don't know. I've made some, especially when I was a bit younger. I think some of my op-eds luckily not so much in my Holmes Report time, because as I've got older, I think I've become a lot better at covering my bases when I write something, and making things as more deliberately vague than perhaps they should be. But maybe in my younger days, some of my op-eds I think were I didn't quite get things right, and I suppose that's a little bit embarrassing. But again, I think it's par for the course for any journalist.
I think it's one of those interview questions where you answer, when they say, "What's your biggest weakness?" You say, "I worry a little bit too much, that I'm too perfect." Or, that I work too hard. I should say that I'm proud to say, when I think we were both in Hong Kong at the time, and when you were still at Haymarket, and I had can't remember if it was an email or a phone call from a certain Mr. Paul Holmes, asking about this Arun Sudhaman guy, and should he hire you? Should he bring you into the Holmes Report? And of course I told him, go for it like a shot. What Paul doesn't know, at least not until not until now, because I guess I'm sharing it with him if he listens to these podcasts, is I then subsequently had chats with you about how to structure your contract.
Yeah, and your advice was very welcome. But I always assumed that Paul had asked you to support his attempt to hire me, because
well, I don't know. I think he will have asked a number
Yeah.
of people. Probably, I'm not the only person.
No,
that he
no,
would
no,
have
I think
asked. And I think he, but you know, I was probably one of a number of people he just asked to talk about that. And maybe, yeah, I think he was partly just checking out. He'd already made his judgment, and I think he was, just as we all do, you know, when we're getting someone just checking our judgments right from other
Yeah.
people. But yeah, maybe he was also asking me to sort of be charmingly persuasive to you.
Well,
I'm
it
sure that would
worked.
have made much difference, but
It worked, which is just as well, really. But I mean, honestly, I say this all the time. I just think I was lucky. I think all of the journalists in the Holmes Report are pretty lucky in that we can continue to be journalists, and we don't have to worry about some of the pressures that afflict other media companies. And you know, that is a relatively good position to be in these days. And we do sort of, to a certain extent, we control our own destiny. And so that, you know, I'm always so thankful to Paul for giving me that opportunity, because you know, life as an industry journalist otherwise, if you look at the last decade, has not been easy.
And I guess in Paul, you also have someone who's terrifically smart and well-read in this industry, isn't he?
Oh yeah,
he really is. I would describe him as erudite.
He's forgotten more about the industry than I guess most people will ever know, and probably with good
which
reason,
must be great, though. You know. Okay, so look, just a big broad brush question about the industry. So, you know, you and I have had discussions before. I've heard you have discussion with other people in the industry, and you've sometimes referred to the fact, asked the question as to whether there's a kind of existential crisis. I think was the phrase in the PR industry. And I'm not saying you've necessarily espoused the fact that there is, but you certainly asked the question for people to respond to. And I remember giving a sort of garbled response to it on a previous call that we had. So I just want to ask you, is it your sense, because you probably talk to more people than anyone, certainly more than I do across all firms, is it your sense that there is a, you know, to use that phrase, an existential crisis going on?
Well, I'll try not to be too garbled, first of all. I mean, there's probably a measure of hyperbole there, because existential is a pretty strong word. But it's the kind of word I use quite often just because I think it makes me sound smarter than I am. But I think the crisis, if you want to call it a crisis, or at least the challenge facing the PR industry, is a real threat, and that is that I think the practice of public relations has decoupled almost from the industry of public relations, in that you don't need to be a PR person or a PR agency to practice public relations successfully. I see many ad agencies developing brilliant public relations campaigns. And I think that's a really big threat for the PR industry, because it means that other types of agencies, whether they're ad agencies or digital agencies or management consulting firms, can go to clients, and maybe clients with bigger budgets, and can say to them, we can do all of your public relations for you. You don't need to hire this PR agency. And I think that is a big threat, because, you know, I think everyone now knows where they need to be when it comes to developing great campaigns or great work or whatever you call it. And that is starting with that kind of that notion that earned media is the sort of central idea upon which you build everything. And what we've seen is every single type of agency, I think, has realized that and has made efforts to get to that space. And in that process, what we've also realized is that PR agencies, PR industry has no monopoly over great public relations ideas or great PR skills. They have a head start. I think they understand the processes better. I think their model is probably best for developing those ideas. but they have no God-given right or guarantee that they're the only ones that can do it. And I think that is a really big threat.
I suppose, yeah, for sure. I suppose you could argue, well, the first thing is that the kind of barriers to entry into setting up a PR firm have always been pretty low. I mean, in one sense, that's why you get new agencies sprouting up every week, right? Because have a computer, phone. You don't even need a desk. You can do it from home, right? Have those and a little bit of nous and experience, or maybe some contacts. You can sort of start doing PR in inverted commas. So that's kind of always been true. I suppose the broader point would be that our global CEO Andy Polanski often talks about everyone. There's no swim lanes anymore. Okay, so it is certainly true that we're finding lots of other swimmers in what used to be our lane, right? It's also true that we're swimming in a lot of other lanes that we never could or would before. And that's right across the board, to the extent that, companies like ours, we're not the only one that are kind of playing in a little bit of the management consultancy space. We're playing a little bit of the advertising space, certainly definitely on online paid media. We're doing all sorts of weird and wonderful things that we weren't doing before. So it could be that there's no swim lanes, but the swimming pool's got a lot bigger for us. Would you kind of agree to that?
Yes, I do agree to that. But I still think it's a relatively small number of firms that are actively competing beyond the public relations swim lane, if I'm being completely honest. And I think it's not quite happening as quickly. If you look at the whole industry, it's not quite happening as quickly as perhaps it should be. So yes, that's clearly the opportunity, right? It goes both ways. In the same way that an ad agency like Droga 5 can develop great PR campaigns, as we've seen, you'd like to think that a PR agency can also start developing, if required, great advertising campaigns for some of its clients. Now, I just see less evidence of that. I'm sure it's happening. I struggle to see as much evidence of it as the converse.
Yes, good point. And I simply, beyond the kind of insight we have into our own firm, and of course our some insight into our larger competitors, that may be true. I suppose one of the big obsessions, as you probably know at the moment, is with data,
right?
Or data, as you prefer to say it,
and
data and insights, we along with again 2 or 3 of our large competitors have been investing very heavily in data and insights expertise. It's probably only just begun to scratch the surface on that, because we can see the drive towards data as being relentless. I attended a meeting we had in New York last week, and someone put up a chart of all the kind of different data roles, different data specialism roles that we may need to recruit in the next 12 months. And I hadn't even heard of some of them, right? What are they? What is that one? What is it? And but nonetheless, and I believe these are people whose skills we're going to have to get for all sorts of weird and wonderful reasons that will enable us to provide clients with better services, and enable us to use that ugly word again, monetize what we're doing more effectively, and so on. So there's no doubt at all there's an obsession with data. If final question, maybe, if you were, and this is an awful thing to be asked by anyone, but is to look into your crystal ball, because predictions are always useless, as we know, but they're lots of fun as well. So if you were to look, I don't know, let's give a time frame of say 3 years, not rather than the distant future. But what's your guess at the major changes we will see, and how the industry will look?
Sorry, time frame again? Next
3 years, maybe? Is that a sensible time frame? Or 2 to 3, let's say. I mean, let's forget 10 years, because who knows? But let's say 2 to 3 years.
Yeah, I think so. It's really encouraging to hear, by the way, about the shift in skills so towards data, and I think broadly that is taking root across the industry.
Mm.
I think there's the rise of technology is kind of impacting all industries, and I think public relations is no exception. And I think it would be a little bit foolish to assume that technology won't start to impact some of the functions in a public relations agency as well. So I think that will also start to happen. But
Through things like what? Machine learning,
absolutely,
AI, all those sort of things you're talking about.
absolutely,
Yeah,
machine learning,
yeah.
AI, automation broadly. Um, but if you were really to ask me what the biggest trend I see affecting the PR industry over the next 3 years, unfortunately, I'd probably say it's consolidation, which has very little to do with skills and has everything to do with resourcing, supply, and demand. And I don't know if that's the answer you're looking for here, but
I'm not really looking for any
yeah,
answer. I'm kind of just
but
interested in your perspective. And by consolidation, because we'll see new entrants marching in further, or simply because within the existing pool of players,
yeah,
or
I just think we have a market that's oversupplied by agencies. Many of them owned by publicly held groups, for whom there is extreme pressure to deliver shareholder value. And so I think that process of consolidation will continue to play out. I think it's been the biggest trend we've seen this year, and I can see easily that continuing for another couple of years. But if you're asking me if you're asking which skills do I think are going to emerge, then yeah, certainly data. I think still the industry has work to do in terms of developing its offering around various different types of content. Um, I mean, there are so many areas that I think the industry could get better. So, take an example: behavioral science is, to me at least, seems like an obvious area where if the industry can better understand what drives decision making, then it can develop better campaigns on behalf of its clients. Will we see a big change in the next 2 to 3 years in terms of behavioral science? I'd be really surprised because I mean, the industry's known about this for at least 5 years now, and I haven't seen any significant movement.
better mug up on the neuro-linguistic programming,
Exactly.
which I have a book on somewhere, but have never finished.
Well, yeah, I mean, areas like that. I think digital broadly, there's still a lot of work to be done at many firms in terms of getting deeper into digital. The ability to counsel higher levels in the organization. So stepping back just from channels, but looking at that kind of CEO council, I hear about a lot. I think in many markets, as you know, I think PR agencies have for whatever reason, sometimes been relegated to a more tactical role. And I think that is an area where the industry needs to look at improving its offer. So yeah, it's a really hard question because I kind of see where the industry, I see areas where the industry should be going, but then I kind of also see the areas where the industry is being challenged and pressured. And it's sort of having to deal with both of those things at the same time. I don't think I've ever seen a time where agencies have been under more pressure than they are today. And I think
it's certainly exciting.
It's very exciting.
It's challenging, but
absolutely.
It's exciting. We're certainly very excited by the opportunities. But yes, of course, there are challenges.
Absolutely. And one of the things we've found, and I'm sure you found this as well, given how well Weber Shandwick has done over the last decade, is that we found that when there is pressure on the industry, if you're doing things well and if you have a good idea or whatever, you can succeed and you can flourish. So there's real opportunities for smart agencies, no question. But I think it's going to be quite hard for a lot of agencies.
Well, on that cheerful Christmas note, I think we're done on time,
Okay.
Arun, and I wanted to thank you for being my guest, even though actually I'm your guest. But the reign of the Lord of Misrule is over. Things are reverting to their normal state. But thank you very, very much indeed for taking on some tough questions.
Thanks, Tim. Though these were really good questions. I enjoyed it. It's always interesting for the roles to be reversed. I far prefer asking the question, as I'm sure you can tell. And yes, as always, thanks to our listeners for sitting through that one. Normal service.
If they did.
Normal service will be resumed with our next podcast. Thank you all.
You've been listening to The Echo Chamber. Brought to you by The Holmes Report and produced by Marketeers.